A man at Moscow State University, a decorated member of the Russian Academy of Sciences, a winner of the USSR State Prize, has spent 40 years running statistical analysis on the historical record, not as a hobby, not as a passion project, as rigorous academic mathematics. And his conclusion, published across 7 volumes and never fully refuted, is this: ancient Rome did not exist when history says it did. Jesus Christ lived in the 12th century. The pyramids are medieval. And the entire chronological framework that every historian, every museum, and every school on Earth uses to date the ancient world was invented by one man, in 1583, with no scientific tools whatsoever. His name is Anatoly Fomenko, and nobody has done the math to prove him wrong. Every date in ancient history, every year assigned to every pharaoh, every battle, every emperor, traces back to a single source. In 1583, a French scholar named Joseph Justus Scaliger published a book called De Emendation Temporum. In it, he constructed the chronological framework that all modern historians still use today. Scaliger was brilliant. He was also working without radiocarbon dating, without archaeology, without a single scientific instrument. He calculated ancient dates using his own mathematical assumptions, and the entire historical establishment accepted them without systematic verification for the next 400 years. Fomenko was not the first great mind to notice this problem. Isaac Newton, who invented calculus, defined gravity, and wrote the laws of motion, spent more years studying chronology than he spent on physics. His posthumous 1728 manuscript, The Chronology of Ancient Kingdoms Amended, argued that conventional ancient dates were wrong by centuries. He concluded that ancient Greece was hundreds of years younger than claimed. Historians dismissed him. Fomenko, reading Newton 3 centuries later, realized the problem was even deeper than Newton had suspected, and that the mathematical tools to test it now existed. Fomenko's approach was mathematical. He developed a technique called dynasty parallelism, a statistical method for analyzing sequences of historical events, the lengths of royal reigns, the frequency of wars, the rise and fall of populations, the astronomical phenomena recorded in ancient texts. When two historical sequences are mathematically identical, statistically impossible to explain by coincidence, they are, Fomenko argued, the same sequence described twice. What he found shocked him. Ancient Roman history and medieval Roman history shared mathematical signatures so precise they could not be separate civilizations. They were duplicates, and Rome was only the beginning. Ancient Rome, according to new chronology, is not a separate civilization that rose and fell 1,000 years before medieval Europe. It is medieval Europe. The Roman Empire that historians place in the 1st through 5th centuries AD, Nero, Trajan, Constantine, the gladiators, the Senate, is the same civilization as medieval Rome, backdated by over 1,000 years by scribes who miscopied and misdated documents they didn't fully understand. Rome is real. The city existed. But ancient Rome, the Rome of Julius Caesar in 44 BC, is what Fomenko calls a temporal phantom, a medieval reality projected backward through a broken dating system. Then comes the claim that makes historians furious. Fomenko's statistical analysis of the life of Jesus Christ places him not in the 1st century AD, but around 1152 AD. He identifies a historical figure, Byzantine Emperor Andronikos I Komnenos, who lived from 1118 to 1185, whose biography is statistically identical to Jesus, betrayed by a trusted associate, publicly executed, surrounded by 12 close followers, preceded by a figure matching John the Baptist, born with accounts of miraculous circumstances. The parallels number in the dozens. Fomenko's argument is blunt. Statistically, they are the same person described by different scribes using different sources. The Egyptian pyramids are dated to approximately 2500 BC. Every textbook, every documentary, every museum placard agrees. Fomenko's analysis of astronomical references in Egyptian temple inscriptions, the precise recorded positions of stars and planets, places the construction of those texts no earlier than the 9th century AD. That would make the pyramids younger than the Hagia Sophia Cathedral. Egyptologists reject this completely. But Fomenko's response is methodical. The dates of 2500 BC come from Egyptian king lists that were themselves dated by Scaliger's 1583 framework. Remove Scaliger, and the entire chronological foundation of Egyptology requires independent proof it has never provided. Radiocarbon dating. This is the point where most people expect the argument to end. Objective science. Carbon, 14 decay. Surely this settles it. Fomenko anticipated this objection precisely. Radiocarbon dating carries a known measurement uncertainty of plus or minus 1 to 2 centuries for most organic samples. More critically, the calibration curves that convert raw carbon measurements into calendar years were constructed using tree-ring chronologies and ice core records, which were themselves anchored to Scaligerian dates. If the conventional timeline contains systematic errors, the calibration curves inherit those errors. The dating method that is supposed to independently verify ancient chronology was built inside the framework it is meant to test. The historical establishment's response to Fomenko is illuminating, not for what it says, but for what it doesn't. Professional historians and archaeologists have called new chronology absurd, pseudoscientific, and dangerous. They have written dismissive reviews. They have pointed out that he cherry-picks historical parallels and misidentifies events. Every one of these criticisms may be correct, but across 40 years and 7 volumes, not a single peer-reviewed paper has published a systematic mathematical rebuttal of Fomenko's dynasty parallelism method. The critics say the conclusion is wrong. None of them have done the mathematics to prove it. In Russia, the public response was entirely different. Fomenko's books have sold over 1 million copies. He has appeared on primetime television. His theories have been endorsed by prominent politicians and public intellectuals. In a country that spent 70 years living under state-mandated history, where the official past was rewritten by decree whenever the present required it, the idea that ancient history was also constructed and controlled by institutions resonated with a particular depth. New chronology became a cultural phenomenon, a theory for people who had already learned, from lived experience, that official historical narratives are not always what they claim to be. Fomenko's most incendiary claim concerns Russia's deepest historical wound, the Mongol invasion. For centuries, Russian national identity has been shaped by the trauma of the Mongol conquest, the destruction of Kiev in 1240, the 2 centuries of subjugation, the Tatar yoke. Fomenko argues this never happened as described. Mongol, he says, is a corruption of the word megalion, meaning great or grand. The so-called Mongol Empire was not an alien force from the east. It was a Russian imperial expansion, the same civilization writing its own history through 2 conflicting sets of documents that later scholars mistook for 2 separate empires occupying the same geography. Consider what it would mean if Fomenko were right. Every museum in the world displaying ancient Greek pottery, Roman sculpture, or Egyptian artifacts is misdating its collections by 1,000 years. Every history textbook taught to every child on Earth describes a past that did not exist when it claims. Every archaeological site labeled as ancient is medieval. The entire foundation of Western civilization's self-understanding, our debt to Athens, to Rome, to the pharaohs, is built on a chronological framework invented by one man with a quill pen in 1583, who had no scientific tools, whose calculations were never independently verified, and whose framework became truth by institutional repetition alone. Fomenko is almost certainly wrong about most of his specific claims. The weight of archaeological evidence, independent linguistic analysis, and multiple overlapping dating methods all support a conventional ancient timeline with far more confidence than he acknowledges. His dynasty parallelism method has genuine flaws. His specific identifications, Jesus as Andronikos, Rome as medieval, require selectively ignoring vast amounts of contradictory evidence. Professional historians are right to reject his conclusions, but the question underneath his conclusions is harder to dismiss. When did anyone rigorously verify that Joseph Scaliger's 1583 calculations were correct? The answer, uncomfortably, is not as thoroughly as we should have. Anatoly Fomenko is 82 years old. He is still a professor at Moscow State University. He has published over 30 books on new chronology. He has never retracted a word. Whether he is a brilliant maverick or a gifted mathematician who went magnificently wrong, he accomplished something genuinely rare. He forced serious people to examine a foundation they had always assumed was solid. The ancient world is probably where history says it is, but our certainty about that rests, more than most people realize, on one scholar's calculations from 1583. If that makes you slightly uncomfortable, you should subscribe. History has many more unstable foundations than anyone teaches in school.